They left me with nothing but my own 2 hands. My name is Clara Whitmore, and I was 12 years old the first time I understood that hunger has its own particular sound, a low, hollow rumble that arrives not just in the stomach but somewhere behind the eyes, a pressure that makes the edges of a room seem slightly too bright and slightly too far away. I remember standing in the doorway of the apartment my mother had rented above a laundromat on Delancey Street, watching 2 men in gray coveralls carry out the only couch we owned while my mother stood beside them signing a paper she did not read. Her hands shaking in a way I had learned, over the previous year, to recognize as the specific tremor that came after a night of drinking rather than the ordinary tremor of cold. She told me, without quite looking at me, that she was going to stay with a friend for a while, that it would be easier for both of us if I stayed with my Aunt Ruth instead. And I remember the strange, floating numbness that settled over me as I nodded, as though my own head belonged to someone else and I was merely borrowing it, watching from a distance while it agreed to something my chest had already understood, with a sick, sinking certainty, was a lie dressed up as a plan. Aunt Ruth lived in a narrow row house 3 towns over, and she was not an unkind woman, only an exhausted one. A woman raising 2 children of her own on wages from a shift at a bottling plant that left her hands raw and her patience thin by the time she walked through her own front door each evening. She fed me, she gave me a mattress on the floor of her son's room, and she made it clear, in small ways that never needed to be spoken aloud, that I was a guest whose welcome had an expiration date she could not name, but that I could feel approaching the way you feel a storm gathering pressure in the air before the first drop of rain ever falls. I slept with one arm curled protectively around the single duffel bag that held everything I owned, a habit that had nothing to do with my cousins, who were kind enough in their careless way, and everything to do with the part of me that had learned, at an age most children are still memorizing multiplication tables, that nothing in my life could be trusted to stay put unless I was the one holding onto it. The nights in that narrow row house taught me a particular kind of listening that I have never fully unlearned, an alertness to the small sounds of a house that was not mine, the creak of the 3rd stair, the specific rhythm of Aunt Ruth's footsteps when she was merely tired versus the heavier, more clipped rhythm of her footsteps when something had gone wrong at the plant that day, and her patience had already been spent before she even reached the front door. I learned to make myself smaller during those second kind of evenings, to fold my elbows in at the dinner table, to answer questions in fewer words than I actually wanted to use, because some quiet animal instinct in me understood that a child who took up too much space in a house already full to its edges was a child who might be asked, eventually, to find a different house altogether. My cousins, Danny and Marcus, were not unkind to me, though their kindness had the careless, unthinking quality of boys who had never once had to wonder where their next meal was coming from. And there were nights I lay on my mattress listening to their easy, uncomplicated breathing beside me and felt a loneliness so total it seemed to have its own weight, pressing down against my chest in the dark long after the house itself had gone quiet. I found my first job the summer I turned 13, sweeping the floor of a bakery 3 blocks from Aunt Ruth's house, a squat brick building with flour dust permanently ground into the seams of the sidewalk outside its door. The owner was a broad, quiet man named Samuel Ostrowski, who did not ask many questions about why a 13-year-old wanted a job instead of a summer of freedom, and who paid me in cash from a coffee can he kept beneath the register, folded bills that I counted twice before folding them again into the lining of my shoe. Because I had already learned that money left visible in a house crowded with other people's needs had a way of disappearing. I remember the particular ache that lived in my lower back after 4 hours of sweeping and lifting flour sacks, a dull, radiating soreness that I secretly welcomed, because it was proof that I had done something, earned something, moved 1 small inch further away from the helplessness of standing in a doorway watching a couch carried out into the street. The bakery became the axis my life turned around for the next 4 years, and Samuel, gruff and sparing with praise as he was, became the closest thing to a steady adult presence I had known since my mother's hands had first begun to shake. He taught me to fold dough with the heel of my palm rather than my fingers, to listen for the particular hollow sound a loaf makes when it is finished baking, to read the temperament of an oven the way other people read the temperament of a person, and somewhere in the slow accumulation of 4 in the morning shifts and flour under my fingernails, I discovered that I was good at something, genuinely, measurably good, in a way that no one could take from me the way my mother had taken away the couch and the apartment and the version of childhood other children seemed to move through without ever once counting the cash in their shoe. I remember in particular the first loaf Samuel let me shape entirely on my own, a plain sourdough boule, and the way my hands trembled slightly as I worked the dough, not from fear exactly but from a kind of reverence I had not expected to feel over something as ordinary as bread. I remember the resistance of the dough under my palms, elastic and alive in a way that surprised me, and the warm, yeasty smell that rose up as I worked it, filling my lungs with something that felt, absurdly, like comfort. When the loaf came out of the oven 40 minutes later, its crust a deep, burnished gold, Samuel broke off a corner without asking, chewed it slowly with the same unreadable expression he wore for everything, and then nodded once, a single sharp motion, before turning back to his own work at the far counter. That nod, small and wordless as it was, lodged itself somewhere permanent in my chest, because it was the first time in longer than I could remember that an adult had looked at something I made with my own two hands and found it worthy, rather than looking at me and finding me merely inconvenient. I will not pretend the years that followed were simple, because simplicity was never a luxury my life afforded me. I moved out of Aunt Ruth's house at 16, into a room above the bakery that Samuel offered me for a rent so low I understood, without either of us saying it, that it was closer to a gift than a transaction, and I finished high school while working nearly 30 hours a week, falling asleep some nights over textbooks with flour still dusted across the page, waking before dawn to the sound of Samuel's truck pulling into the alley below my window. My mother resurfaced twice during those years, each time with a version of herself that looked thinner and more hollowed out than the last, each time asking, in a voice pitched to sound casual, whether I had any money I could spare, and each time I felt the old numbness rise up in my chest like floodwater finding the same familiar low ground, my heart pounding with a confused, aching mixture of love and fury that had no clean name, my hands trembling as I counted out bills I had earned with, blistered fingers torn between the child and me who still wanted, more than anything, to be chosen by her, and the young woman I had built myself into, who understood that every dollar handed over was a dollar that would not save my mother and would only delay, briefly, whatever crisis was coming for her next. The turning point, if a life like mine can be said to have a single turning point rather than 1,000 small accumulating ones, arrived on a Tuesday in early spring when I was 17, standing behind the bakery counter ringing up a regular customer's order of rye bread. And Samuel called me into the back room with a seriousness in his voice that made my stomach drop, because seriousness from Samuel usually meant bad news, an unpaid bill, a broken oven, some new weight added to a life already heavy with weights. Instead, he told me, in his characteristically blunt, unadorned way, that his knees were failing him, that the doctor had told him plainly he could not keep standing 12-hour shifts on a concrete floor for much longer, and that he wanted to know, before he made any decisions about the future of the bakery, whether I would consider staying on not as an employee but as a partner, someone who would eventually take over the business entirely. Using savings he would help me structure, and a loan he was willing to co-sign because, as he put it, gruffly, refusing to meet my eyes as he said it. He had never in 30 years of running that bakery watched anyone work the way I worked, and he would be damned if he let that kind of stubbornness go to waste on someone else's payroll. I do not have adequate words for what moved through me in that moment, standing in a back room that smelled of yeast and burnt sugar, listening to a man who had never once told me he cared about me offer me, in the only language he knew how to speak, which was the language of trust backed by real, tangible risk, the first piece of solid ground I had stood on since the afternoon that couch was carried out of my mother's apartment. My eyes burned, though I did not let the tears fall, because some habits carved deep enough in childhood take years longer to unlearn than the wounds that carved them, and I remember gripping the edge of the flour-dusted table to steady myself, feeling the rough wood beneath my palms, grounding myself in that single, solid physical sensation the way I had once grounded myself in the ache of my own lower back after a long shift, proof again that something real and unshakable was happening to me, that I had not imagined it, that no one was going to arrive tomorrow to carry this away in the back of a truck. I asked Samuel, once my voice had steadied enough to trust it, why he would take such a risk on someone as young as I was, someone with no family name behind her and no collateral beyond a duffel bag and 4 years of swept floors. And he was quiet for a long moment before he answered, turning a rolling pin over slowly in his big, flour-creased hands as though weighing his words with the same care he weighed a batch of dough. He told me that he had watched a great many young people pass through that bakery over 30 years, sons and daughters of neighbors, kids working off a summer's boredom, and that nearly all of them had treated the work as something to be endured on the way to somewhere else. I was the only one, he said, who had ever treated an oven timer going off at 4 in the morning as though it were a promise rather than a punishment, And a man did not need collateral to recognize that kind of promise when he saw it standing in front of him with flower on her sleeves. I signed the papers 3 weeks later, at a small desk in a credit union that smelled of stale coffee and carpet cleaner, my signature careful and deliberate beneath Samuel's looser, more confident scrawl. And I remember the strange vertigo of walking back out onto the sidewalk afterward, blinking in the ordinary afternoon light, feeling as though the entire structure of my life had shifted several degrees on its axis without a single visible thing around me having changed at all. The street looked the same cracked pavement, the same rattling bus idling at the corner. And yet I was no longer the same girl who had walked into that credit union an hour earlier, because for the first time since the afternoon on Delancey Street, I was not merely surviving inside a life someone else controlled. I was building one, plank by plank, with my own 2 hands, and no one, not my mother, not a caseworker, not a stranger in gray coveralls, could carry it out the door while I stood by helplessly watching. The years that followed were not a straight upward line, because no honest life ever is. There were seasons when the ovens broke twice in 1 month and I lay awake calculating whether we could make payroll. Seasons when my mother called from numbers I did not recognize and I had to relearn again and again the particular discipline of loving someone from a careful, protective distance rather than up close where her chaos could pull me under with her. But slowly, the way dough rises not because you watch it but because you trust the process and walk away and come back later to find it transformed. My life took a shape I could recognize as my own. By 22, I owned the bakery outright. The loan paid down faster than even Samuel had predicted, and I had hired, in a decision that still catches in my throat every time I think of it, a girl named Priya, 17 years old, sleeping some nights in her car outside the public library because things at home had become unsafe. And I gave her a job sweeping floors and folding dough with the heel of her palm. And I paid her in a manner that ensured she never once had to fold her earnings into the lining of her shoe. I remember the first afternoon Priya stood in the doorway of the bakery, her shoulders drawn up around her ears in a posture I recognized instantly and completely, because it was the exact posture I had worn myself at Aunt Ruth's dinner table. The posture of a girl trying to take up as little space in the world as possible so that no one would think to remove her from it. I did not tell her that first day that I understood, because I had learned enough by then to know that trust cannot be rushed into being with words alone, that it has to be earned in small, repeated, unglamorous proofs, a paycheck that arrives exactly on time, a shift schedule that does not change without warning, a locked drawer where she could leave her own belongings without fear that a stranger might carry them off in the back of a truck. I watched her over the following months, unclench by degrees so small that I doubt she noticed them happening to herself. The way her shoulders eventually dropped an inch, the way she began arriving 10 minutes early simply because she wanted to, not because she feared what would happen if she did not. And I understood, watching her, that I was not merely running a bakery anymore. I was tending to something far more fragile and far more important than bread. And that Samuel had done the very same thing for me without ever once calling it by so grand a name. I think often about the doorway on Delancey Street, about the particular floating numbness that carried me through the worst afternoon of my childhood, and I understand now, in a way I could not have articulated at 12, that the numbness was never weakness. It was a kind of armor a frightened child built out of whatever materials were available to her in the moment she needed it most, and that armor, however useful it once was, does not have to remain welded to your skin forever. I still keep a coffee can behind my own register, an echo of Samuel's, not because I need to hide cash there anymore, but because some rituals become less about function and more about honoring the hands that first showed you a kinder way to live. I am 23 years old now, and some mornings, standing in the bakery before the sun has fully risen, flour settling like quiet snow across the counters, I let myself remember the girl on the mattress in her cousin's room, curled protectively around a duffel bag, and I speak to her, silently, the way you might speak to someone you love who is standing just out of reach, and I tell her that she was right to hold on so tightly to what little she had, and that she can finally, after everything, let her hands rest open.
Thanks for tuning in. If you like this, please like and subscribe. Your support means everything and helps me create more of these dramas. See you in the next story.